Megan stepped out of the car, taking in the picture-perfect scene before her. The large suburban house stood bathed in the glow of the setting sun, the windows aglow with warmth, and the lawn meticulously manicured. The faint smell of turkey, cinnamon, and pumpkin pie filled the air, making it feel like the quintessential Thanksgiving gathering. Her husband, Jake, walked ahead, his easy smile and laughter carrying through the crisp air as he waved at his family standing by the door. Megan felt a pang of unease settle in her chest as she followed him up the steps. She had been looking forward to tonight, this Thanksgiving, hoping it would be different. It had been 5 years since she married Jake, and in all that time, she had never quite felt like she belonged in his family. The love they shared for each other was genuine, but when it came to his family, she was always just a guest. Tonight, she hoped the warmth of the occasion would melt the distance between her and them. She wanted to feel like she was a part of this, like she mattered, like she was more than just an outsider. But deep down, she knew that it wouldn't be so simple. The moment they walked through the front door, the energy shifted. While everyone greeted Jake with hugs and smiles, Megan's welcome was cool, polite, barely more than a nod from his mother, Evelyn, and a tight-lipped smile from his sisters, Samantha and Tina. She swallowed the lump in her throat, pushing her unease aside. Tonight was supposed to be different. She'd even promised herself she wouldn't let the subtle snubs get to her this time. Maybe this year would be different, she told herself. Maybe this time they would finally see me, not as an outsider, but as family. But as dinner progressed and laughter filled the room, there was a gnawing tension that Megan couldn't shake off. She felt like something was off, just a small whisper of doubt, and brushed it aside as nerves. But little did she know, this Thanksgiving dinner was about to push her to a breaking point, one she had been too afraid to face before. Megan followed Jake up the steps and into the house, trying to shake the nagging sense of discomfort settling in her stomach. She had spent the last week mentally preparing for this Thanksgiving, convincing herself that this time would be different. Maybe this year, she'd finally be accepted by Jake's family, or at least treated as more than just an outsider. Jake, as always, seemed completely at ease in his family's presence. His warmth and ease with his mother, Barbara, and his 2 sisters, Samantha and Tina, made Megan feel like an intruder in her own marriage. Barbara, as always, greeted Jake with an effusive hug, her face lighting up as if the very sight of him made her day. She was a petite woman, always immaculately dressed, and her smile had the kind of warmth that made you feel like everything was just right in the world, unless you were Megan. When Barbara turned toward Megan, her smile faltered ever so slightly, replaced by a quick, formal hug that barely lasted a second. Samantha and Tina offered similar cold welcomes, polite handshakes, perfunctory hugs, but their eyes lacked the warmth they reserved for Jake. It was as if she didn't belong in their world, no matter how many years she had been married to their son and brother. Megan had been married to Jake for 5 years, but every time she stepped into his family's house, it felt like she was walking into a foreign territory. They shared jokes, memories, and experiences that Megan was never a part of, and the more time went on, the more it felt like she would never be able to break into their tight-knit dynamic. Jake, for his part, never seemed to notice the coldness she felt. He was too busy basking in his mother's adoration, too comfortable in the warmth of his sister's attention, to recognize how out of place Megan felt. But tonight, she had hoped things might be different. Dinner was served soon after they arrived. Barbara's famous roast turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing, and an array of sides that made the table look like something out of a holiday catalog. The house was beautiful, decked out with the kind of tasteful decor that only Barbara could pull off. Perfectly placed candles, hand-picked centerpieces, and a lavish spread that spoke more about her desire for perfection than any true holiday cheer. As they all sat down to eat, Megan felt the weight of the conversation pressing in on her. Barbara launched into a detailed account of the family's Thanksgiving traditions, detailing how every year she made her famous stuffing from scratch. Never a word about Megan's contributions to the holiday. Samantha chimed in with stories about her children, discussing their latest accomplishments in school, while Tina shared an update on her new job promotion and recent vacation to Italy. Both sisters laughed and exchanged anecdotes as if Megan wasn't sitting there at all. She tried to join in, offering polite comments when appropriate, but the words never seemed to land. It was as though the conversation was happening around her, not with her. Jake, completely unaware of the distance that was growing between Megan and his family, laughed along with them, his voice loud and filled with joy. He was in his element, his family, his people, and Megan was just a shadow in the background, trying to force herself into a space that wasn't meant for her. The more they reminisced about things from the past, the more Megan felt herself shrinking, like a ghost fading into the walls. No one seemed to notice her absence in the conversation, no one but her. It was becoming harder to hold back the sting of the exclusion, the subtle jabs that had become so familiar over the years. Megan tried to smile, to keep the peace, but it wasn't easy. The weight of it all pressed down on her, and she felt the hurt creeping in, even as she silently swallowed it. After dinner, Barbara clapped her hands together, signaling the start of their annual Thanksgiving gift exchange. Megan had always felt that this tradition was more of a performance than a genuine gesture of love. Barbara took great pride in playing the role of the benevolent matriarch, handing out lavish gifts to everyone, making sure the family knew how much she loved and appreciated them. It wasn't about the gifts themselves, but about showing how much she could provide and how perfect everything in her life was. Megan's heart sank as Barbara began to distribute the gifts. First, Samantha received an expensive designer handbag, then Tina was given a luxury spa voucher. Jake was handed a bottle of rare whiskey, the kind he had been eyeing for months. And yet, Megan's hands remained empty, just like every other year. She tried to shake off the feeling of being overlooked, of being irrelevant, but as the gifts kept coming and she remained forgotten, the familiar ache returned. She forced herself to smile and look grateful for the meal, for the warm house, but deep down, she couldn't ignore the sense of abandonment. Barbara turned to her with a forced smile. "Oh, we just forgot about you this year," she said lightly, as if it was no big deal. The room fell silent for a moment, and everyone, Samantha, Tina, even Jake, burst out laughing, as if this was just a harmless mistake. But it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like a slap in the face. Megan's heart pounded in her chest. She smiled tightly, trying to mask the sting of the moment. "That's okay," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "I didn't forget about you." And with that, the tension in the room shifted, like something was about to break. Megan reached into her bag and pulled out a small, neatly wrapped box. She handed it to Barbara, her smile now cold and resolute. It was time to end the charade. Tonight, she wasn't going to sit quietly and pretend anymore. Barbara began the gift exchange with the same enthusiasm she always did, taking great pleasure in doling out presents to everyone in the room. Samantha was first, and as always, she received the most lavish gift, a luxurious designer handbag that Megan knew cost more than the rent on their apartment. Samantha's eyes sparkled with delight as she hugged the bag to her chest, and Barbara beamed with pride, clearly pleased with herself. Next, Tina received a lavish spa voucher, the kind that promised a weekend of pampering in a luxurious resort. Tina smiled broadly, her eyes gleaming with appreciation, and Barbara clapped her hands in delight. Megan smiled politely, but inside, her heart began to sink. She tried to ignore the hollow feeling creeping up inside her, the ache in her chest growing with every passing moment. Jake, sitting next to Megan, leaned forward with a wide grin when it was his turn. Barbara handed him a bottle of expensive whiskey, one that Megan knew he had mentioned wanting for months. "Perfect for the holiday season," Barbara said with a smile, and Jake laughed, clearly thrilled by the gift. Even the children, running around the room in their festive outfits, were not overlooked. They were handed shiny new toys, each of them squealing with excitement. Megan felt like she was sitting in a dream, watching the celebration unfold around her, the cheerful faces of her husband and his family glowing with happiness. The disparity between her place at the table and everyone else's couldn't have been more obvious. She felt invisible, as if she were sitting there as nothing more than a bystander in her own life. It wasn't just that she hadn't received a gift, it was the casual indifference that came with it. They didn't even think to include her in the exchange. Finally, the moment arrived. Barbara turned to Megan, still wearing that too-perfect smile of hers, and casually said, "Oh, we must have forgotten you this year." Her words rang in the air like a slap, as if the entire room had been waiting for Megan to realize her place. There was no apology in her tone, no attempt to make it right, just the cold reality of being excluded. The laughter that followed was even worse. Jake chuckled along with his family, a nervous, awkward sound that echoed around the room. The others, too, laughed as if it were some inside joke that only they understood. Megan sat there, frozen, trying to swallow the lump in her throat. She could feel the sting of being excluded, the embarrassment of being laughed at by the people who were supposed to be her family. Jake hadn't even noticed her discomfort. His eyes remained bright with the joy of his new gift, and his laughter made her feel even smaller. It was as if she were invisible, just a placeholder in a room that wasn't meant for her. For a moment, all Megan could do was stare at the table, the weight of her husband's indifference pressing down on her. The laughter continued around her, but it felt like it was coming from far away, a dull hum that made everything feel surreal.
How could they do this to me?
The thought ran through her mind over and over, each repetition a reminder of the years she had spent trying to be part of this family, only to be treated like an outsider, like an afterthought. But in that moment, something inside her shifted. The humiliation, the years of biting her tongue, and the pain of never being seen, all of it crystallized into a surge of confidence, unexpected and raw. She wasn't going to sit there and take it anymore. She wasn't going to pretend it didn't hurt, pretend it didn't matter. With a tight smile, Megan forced herself to look up at Barbara, her voice calm but firm. "That's okay," she said, her words cutting through the awkwardness in the room. "I didn't forget about you." Her heart pounded in her chest, but there was a strange sense of strength rising within her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. The room fell silent. The laughter abruptly stopped, and everyone's eyes turned toward her. Jake paused mid-laugh, his expression faltering as he looked at her. Megan didn't look away. She had already made up her mind. She wasn't going to let this moment pass without saying something, without standing her ground. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, neatly wrapped box. Her fingers trembled slightly as she handed it to Barbara.
There was no hesitation now.
Megan knew exactly what she had to do. Barbara's smile faltered for the briefest of moments, and she hesitated before reaching out to take the gift from Megan. The silence in the room was suffocating, every pair of eyes trained on Barbara as she slowly unwrapped the box. The air felt thick with anticipation. Samantha and Tina leaned in, their curiosity piqued, their expressions a mix of confusion and intrigue. Barbara peeled back the wrapping paper, her brow furrowing as she looked inside the box. Megan could see the confusion on her face, the momentary flicker of uncertainty before she began pulling out the contents, official-looking papers. The room was still, no one daring to speak, and for a moment, it felt like time had stopped. The tension was palpable, and Barbara's grip on the papers tightened as she scanned the first page. Megan held her breath. This was it. This was the moment everything would change. Barbara's hands trembled slightly as she peeled back the wrapping paper. The room grew quieter with every movement, the anticipation thick in the air. Inside the box were several documents, official-looking papers, neatly stacked, their edges crisp and sharp. The family's eyes immediately moved to the pages, drawn to them as if they held a secret too dangerous to ignore. Barbara's smile faltered as she began flipping through the first few pages. Her brow furrowed, and for the briefest moment, Megan saw something she hadn't expected: doubt. The confident, controlling matriarch who always had everything under her control was now visibly shaken, her composure slipping. As she flipped to the next page, her face grew paler, and her hands began to shake slightly. She stopped, staring at the document in front of her, the color draining from her cheeks. Samantha and Tina leaned in, peering over Barbara's shoulder, their eyes scanning the pages. The tension in the room was electric. Everyone else, including Jake, sat frozen, waiting for someone to say something, but no one dared break the silence. Megan, however, remained calm, her heart racing but her demeanor unwavering. This moment was years in the making, and she wasn't going to falter now. Finally, it was time for Megan to speak. She couldn't let them think this was some mistake or accident. This wasn't just a gift, it was a reckoning. Her voice was steady as she broke the silence. "I've been looking into your business, Barbara," she said, her words deliberate and clear. "For the past few months, I've uncovered a lot of things I don't think you ever expected anyone to find." Barbara's eyes snapped up to meet Megan's, a flicker of panic crossing her face. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice shaky, but she couldn't hide the fear in her eyes. Megan continued, her tone unflinching. "Your catering company, you've been underreporting your income for years, evading taxes, and hiding money that doesn't exist on the books. I've got all the documentation right here. Everything you've done." She gestured to the stack of papers in front of Barbara. "And if I wanted to, I could send this all to the IRS. It's all ready, all neatly documented. Every move you made." The family sat in stunned silence. Barbara's mouth opened and closed as if she were searching for something to say, but the words wouldn't come. Her hand clutched the papers tighter, as if holding them would somehow reverse what was happening. Megan could see the cracks in her mother-in-law's carefully constructed world, and for the first time, Barbara didn't seem like the omnipotent matriarch anymore. She seemed like the woman who had been caught. The panic spread quickly. Barbara started shaking her head, trying to deny the truth. "This is nonsense," she stammered, her voice wavering. "These are lies. Who do you think you are, trying to destroy me?" But the evidence was irrefutable. The numbers were clear. The dates and transactions, all laid bare for anyone who cared to look. Megan watched with a growing sense of satisfaction as Barbara's perfect reputation began to unravel, thread by thread. The woman who had so often used her power to control the family, to manipulate situations in her favor, was now at the mercy of the truth. Samantha and Tina were no longer looking at each other with the same smug confidence. Their eyes darted between the papers and their mother, uncertainty clouding their faces. They started flipping through the documents more frantically now, their expressions shifting from confusion to fear. Samantha, usually the more composed of the two, now looked unsettled, her hands trembling as she scanned the pages. "Mom," Tina said in a shaky voice, her words hanging in the air. "What is this? Why does it look like these are tax forms?" Her voice trailed off, the question hanging there, unanswered. Barbara's usual deflection wasn't working. She couldn't control this moment. The walls she had built up around her crumbled as her carefully crafted facade shattered in front of everyone. She glanced at Jake, but his expression was unreadable. He sat there, stiff and silent, as though the situation had just become too much for him to comprehend. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Megan felt a strange sense of satisfaction. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when the years of silence, of being treated like an outsider, had led to this. She had been waiting for Barbara to face the consequences of her actions, to finally be held accountable for the years of manipulation and control. This was Megan's moment of victory, and despite the chaos unfolding in front of her, she felt a sense of peace. Jake, still frozen, didn't speak. His sisters turned to him, their eyes filled with expectation, silently asking him to defend Megan, to step up for the first time in their marriage. But instead, he just sat there, stunned, unable to form a response. Megan watched him, the man she had loved and married, the man she had stood by for years, and realized in that moment that he wasn't going to help her. He wasn't going to protect her. Not in this. He had never seen her as an equal, as someone worthy of defending. He had always been on his mother's side, laughing off her insults, shrugging away the hurt. And now, in the face of this betrayal, he couldn't even find his voice. Her satisfaction began to wane, replaced by the painful reality that she had given so much to a man who couldn't even stand up for her. But the satisfaction of watching Barbara falter, watching the consequences of her actions take root, was enough to make Megan feel like she had won, no matter what happened next. Barbara's eyes narrowed as she gathered herself, the color draining from her face. The calm exterior she had so carefully maintained for years now cracked wide open. She turned on Megan with a venomous glare, her voice trembling with anger. "You're a traitor," she spat, her words sharp and filled with disdain. "You've been nothing but ungrateful, trying to destroy this family." The room seemed to close in around Megan as Barbara's attack continued. The venom in Barbara's voice was unlike anything Megan had ever heard before. The woman who had always held power over the family, the woman who had demanded perfection from everyone around her, was now lashing out, trying to shift the blame. "You've always been nothing more than a problem, haven't you? Always wanting more, never happy, always stirring trouble. You think you're so clever digging into my business. But what you've done, is unforgivable." Megan's chest tightened, but she stood her ground, her back straight, her voice calm. The satisfaction she had felt moments ago now mingled with a quiet resolve. This was her moment to finally speak her truth, to stop hiding behind the smile she had forced for years. "I'm not trying to destroy anything, Barbara. I'm just tired. Tired of being treated like I don't belong, like I'm invisible. For years, I've let you and everyone else in this family push me around, belittle me, and exclude me.
And you know what?
I'm done." The silence in the room felt suffocating. Everyone was watching, waiting. Jake, who had been silent up until this point, finally spoke, his voice low and hesitant. "Why would you do this, Megan?" he asked, his words heavy with confusion. "Why would you go this far? We're family. You didn't have to take it this far." Megan's heart sank as his words hit her, but she didn't let her guard drop. "Family," she echoed bitterly. "You think this is family, Jake? How many times have I tried to fit in, tried to make things work? How many years have I spent trying to make you and your mother and sisters happy? And you just sit there, laughing along with them, never once standing up for me, never once calling out the way I've been treated. How many times have I been the one who tried to make this work, while you just let them make me feel small?" Her voice was steady, but the words burned as they came out. It felt like a weight was lifting off her shoulders, but the pain of the years spent trying to be a part of this family was sharp and fresh. Jake flinched, his face reddening with frustration. "I never meant to make you feel like that. You know I love you, but you've always blown things out of proportion. My family isn't perfect, but they're mine and you." He stopped, taking a deep breath, clearly torn. "You're not the only one in this. We've all been hurt." The words stung, each syllable from Jake pushing Megan further away. She could see the struggle in his eyes, but there was also a deep, quiet truth that she had been ignoring for too long. Jake had never stood up for her. He had never defended her when his family made her feel like an outsider. He had never once chosen her over them. Megan's resolve only hardened as she looked at him, seeing him not as the husband she had tried so desperately to please, but as the man who had let her down for years. "I'm done," she thought. "I'm done pretending that this was ever going to change." At that moment, Megan knew what she had to do. The decision came to her clearly, as if it had always been there, waiting for the right moment to surface. Without another word, she reached up and slipped her wedding ring off her finger. The cool metal felt heavy in her palm as she walked toward Jake, who looked at her, confusion and disbelief clouding his eyes. She held the ring out to him, her fingers trembling slightly, but her resolve steady. "Take it," she said softly, her voice trembling only slightly. "I'm done. I'm leaving." The room fell into an eerie silence as Jake stared at her, his eyes wide with shock. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Barbara, who had been watching from the corner, suddenly moved forward, her expression twisting into one of desperation. "Megan, don't do this," she pleaded, her voice almost pleading. "Don't walk away from your family like this. You don't know what you're doing." But Megan was beyond hearing her. She couldn't stay in this house anymore, not with these people who had never accepted her. She couldn't be part of a family that never saw her, never valued her. She had spent too many years trying to fit into a mold that wasn't meant for her. And now it was time to let go. With one final look at Jake, who still sat there, frozen, unable to move, Megan turned and walked to the door. She didn't look back as she opened it and stepped out into the cold night air. The door slammed behind her with a finality that reverberated in her chest. She didn't feel angry anymore, nor did she feel sad. She felt free, free from the years of silent suffering, free from the weight of trying to make them accept her. It was over. As she walked down the driveway, her heart was light for the first time in years. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she had taken the first step toward reclaiming her life. And she would never look back. In the weeks that followed, Megan found herself navigating a path she had long been afraid to walk. The weight of years spent trying to earn approval, trying to fit into a family that had never truly accepted her, began to lift. She threw herself into her work, immersing herself in the projects that had always been put on the back burner. Her career, which had once been a source of secondary importance in her life, now took center stage. Megan worked late into the evenings, feeling the satisfaction of accomplishment without the constant need for validation from others. But it wasn't just her career that she focused on. For the first time in years, Megan allowed herself to pursue new hobbies, things she had always wanted to try but had set aside. She took up painting, spent more time reading, and even started taking yoga classes. Each new activity felt like an act of reclaiming parts of herself that had been buried under years of neglect. The more she explored her own interests, the more she realized how much of herself she had sacrificed in the pursuit of trying to fit into a mold that wasn't hers. As her life began to shift, Megan also took the time to reconnect with old friends. Friends she had lost touch with over the years as she had sunk deeper into her marriage, trying to make things work with Jake and his family. She reached out to Lauren, a college friend who had always been there for her, and rekindled their bond. The warmth and laughter that returned to her life through these connections were like a balm to her soul, reminding her of who she had been before all the toxicity had clouded her vision. In the quiet moments, Megan reflected on what had brought her to this point. She began to see how she had been complicit in allowing herself to be mistreated. It wasn't just Barbara's actions that had hurt her. It was her own willingness to overlook the small slights, to make excuses for them, and to let the years of emotional neglect pile up. Jake, too, had played a role in her suffering. But now, for the first time, Megan understood the importance of setting boundaries. She had allowed herself to be pushed aside for so long, and in doing so, had lost sight of who she was. She learned that self-love wasn't just about self-care. It was about not allowing others to define her worth, especially when they couldn't offer her the same respect. The realization was liberating. Megan understood now that she didn't need her husband, nor his toxic family, to validate her existence. She was enough on her own. No longer did she have to be the one to sacrifice, to give without receiving, to accept the crumbs of affection that were thrown her way. She had value simply because she was herself, not because of what she could do for others. Yet, despite the relief that came with this newfound freedom, there were moments when Megan allowed herself to grieve. She still mourned the family she had never truly had, the bond she had tried so hard to forge and nurture. She missed the idea of what family was supposed to be, the support, the love, the belonging that had always seemed just out of reach. But the more Megan reflected, the more she understood that true family wasn't about obligation or maintaining ties for the sake of tradition. It was about mutual respect, trust, and unconditional love. And those things had never been offered to her by Barbara, Samantha, or Tina. The love she had always craved from her in-laws was conditional, dependent on her silence and submission. Megan now saw that she had given her all for a version of family that was built on manipulation and control. The true definition of family, she realized, wasn't one bound by blood or shared history. It was one based on respect, understanding, and shared values. Megan no longer felt the need to explain her worth to anyone. She knew her worth now, and that was enough. The emptiness she once felt when she thought about her in-laws began to fade. The sadness was still there, but it was no longer the defining emotion of her life. It had made space for a new sense of peace, for the quiet certainty that she had made the right decision, that she had taken the necessary steps toward her own happiness and fulfillment. The next chapter of Megan's life was just beginning, and for the first time in years, she was excited about the possibilities. She was learning that sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most fulfilling lives. Megan stood tall, her heart finally free from the weight of her past. She had reclaimed her life, choosing happiness, career, and personal growth over the toxic relationships that had once defined her. Every day now was a step forward, a step toward becoming the woman she had always wanted to be but had been too afraid to pursue. Her career flourished as she focused on the goals that had once seemed distant. She didn't need anyone's validation but her own. Megan knew that the strength to build the life she wanted was within her all along, and now it was hers for the taking. Jake, despite his attempts to reach out, could no longer pull her back into the life they once shared. His calls and messages grew more frequent, each one a plea for her to return, to forgive him, to make things work. But Megan had made her choice. She was done waiting for him to choose her. She had chosen herself. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. She no longer had the desire to hold on to a marriage built on silence, neglect, and sacrifice. With her life now in her hands, Megan looked toward the future with newfound clarity and empowerment. She was no longer held captive by the judgment of her in-laws or the fractured relationship with Jake. The weight of their expectations had no hold on her anymore. Megan was free, not just from the family that never truly accepted her, but from the fear of stepping into the unknown. She felt more alive, more confident, and more capable than ever before. The world was wide open for her, and she was ready to embrace everything it had to offer. The journey had been difficult, but Megan had learned that true empowerment comes from within. She had broken free, and now, for the first time in years, Megan was living a life that was truly her own. Have you ever been betrayed by your family? What would you do if everything you worked for was taken for granted? Let me know in the comments below.